In the dark heart of 1871, when justice was blind and terror wore a white hood, one man rode against the tide. They called him a phantom, a demon, a shadow born of the night itself, a lone rider cloaked in darkness who dealt the kind of justice the law refused to deliver. But this was no ordinary vigilante. This was a ghost forged in the fires of war, a black man who hunted the hunters. Before we carry on, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's journey back to 1871, to a small town in western Tennessee, a place where fear wore a hood and a legend was about to be born in the dark. The late afternoon sun sagged low and swollen in the Tennessee sky, pouring gold light through the trees that lined the dusty road. Isaac Granger, a man in his late 20s, rode his sturdy horse down the trail toward the town of Redemption Crossing. The name itself, he thought bitterly, was an irony he was only beginning to taste. He had the lean, hard body of a soldier, carved by war, molded by hunger, and the watchful eyes of a scout who had long ago learned that survival depended on noticing what others missed. He remembered Redemption Crossing as a place full of noise and laughter, where the clang of the blacksmith's hammer mingled with the murmur of markets and the carefree gossip of neighbors. But the town he entered now was a hollow echo of that memory. The air was heavy, the silence unnatural. Storefronts that once displayed their wares stood blinded by boarded-up windows. The few souls who moved along the street, black and white alike, walked fast, their shoulders hunched, their gazes fixed on the ground. The rhythm of Isaac's horse's hooves was the only heartbeat left in that town. He could feel the tension, thick and sour as humidity, soaking into his bones. The war had promised freedom, but what he saw here was not peace, only a fragile ceasefire. A silence that hid screams. He turned off the main road and rode toward the small farm that belonged to Miss Sarah Carter, an elderly black woman who had been one of his late mother's closest friends. As the cabin came into view, the cold knot in his stomach tightened. Her land, once alive with rows of vegetables and laughter, was sagging into ruin. The fences leaned like weary old men. The fields were overgrown and untended, and on the side of her barn, a broad blackened scar of charred wood burned like an open wound. Sarah came rushing from the porch as he dismounted, her face lined and worn, yet still full of that fierce spark he remembered. She grabbed him in an embrace that trembled with both joy and dread. "Isaac, Lord be praised, you're home," she whispered, clutching his arms. "But this ain't the home you left, child." "I can see that," he murmured, his gaze drifting to the burned barn wall. "What happened here, Sarah? Why's the town so quiet?" "Feels like the war never ended." Sarah's eyes darted toward the tree line, her voice dropping to a whisper that trembled like wind through dry leaves. "They call themselves the Night Riders," she said. "Goblins from hell, that's what they are, dressed in white sheets. They come at night, Isaac. Burn, whip, take what they please. They want to scare us back into chains or into the grave." "The sheriff?" Isaac asked. "What does he do?" "Nothing," she said, shaking her head. "He looks the other way. Sometimes he even smiles when he hears the stories. Ain't no law here anymore, child. Just ghosts with guns." Isaac stood there for a long moment, jaw tight, his mind burning with anger that glowed hotter than the setting sun. 4 years of war, 4 years of bleeding for freedom, and this was what it had bought them. A different kind of slavery, a quieter kind of death. That night, Isaac tried to sleep, but sleep came shallow and uneasy. When it finally did, it broke suddenly with the sound of distant shouting, human voices carried on the wind, punctuated by the dull orange glow of fire rising against the dark horizon. He was on his feet in seconds, instincts snapping into place. He dressed in silence, dark clothes and soft boots, and slipped into the night. The woods behind Sarah's farm welcomed him like an old comrade. He moved through them with the quiet grace of a predator, the sound of his own breath drowned by the growing roar of chaos ahead. He crested a small ridge and saw them, a dozen riders, hooded and cloaked in white, circling the small homestead of the Johnson family. Good people he'd known since before the war. Their horses stamped nervously, casting plumes of steam into the night air. The riders' torches burned like the eyes of devils. Isaac froze. the scene burning into his memory. Mr. Johnson dragged from his home, beaten and tied to a post. His wife and children huddled on the porch, too terrified to scream. The crack of the whip tore through the night like gunfire. Flames leapt from the family's cotton shed, devouring the year's harvest in minutes. He could taste the smoke and hate in the air. 12 men. He counted. Shotguns, pistols, torches, and one taller rider on a fine horse, sitting proud and barking orders, the leader. His hood whiter, his robe cleaner, his voice dripping arrogance. Isaac's eyes fixed on him. He stayed there until the last scream died, the last flame turned to embers. Then he turned back through the woods, his mind already beginning to plan. He reached his old family cabin before dawn, a place abandoned since his parents died, its timbers gray and leaning, its hearth cold as stone. Inside, by the weak flicker of a lantern, Isaac unpacked a worn leather satchel. He laid out its contents on the dusty floor, his folded Union Scout uniform, still deep blue, a Colt revolver, cleaned and oiled, a Bowie knife, its edge gleaming, and a handful of small tools and tracking instruments that had saved his life more times than he could count. He stared at them for a long while, symbols of a war that was supposed to have meant something. Finally, he opened a small leather-bound journal and dipped his pen in ink. October 1871, he wrote. Returned to Redemption Crossing. Found not peace but a new war. A war of shadows. The law is blind or worse. If they hunt in darkness, then darkness is where I'll meet them. He closed the book, loaded his Colt, and watched the reflection of the lantern flame in the gunmetal. His jaw set. The soldier was gone. A hunter was being born. In that cabin, Isaac Granger began the work of erasing himself. He would not hide. He would become something else. Something the riders feared. Something the night itself whispered about. He was not just making a disguise. He was creating a symbol, a ghost. He began his transformation with a steady, ritual-like precision. Outside, the first light of dawn had barely touched the tops of the trees when Isaac gathered walnuts from the forest floor. Their green husks stained his fingers dark as he cracked and boiled them in a dented iron pot over a low fire. Into the bubbling mixture he crushed charcoal until the liquid thickened into a dye as black as a starless sky. The smell was sharp and earthy, the color unyielding. He submerged a pair of canvas trousers and a simple collarless shirt into it, stirring them until the fabric drank the darkness and refused to give it back. When he hung them to dry, they looked less like clothes and more like the night itself. He worked silently, the only sounds the pop of firewood and the murmur of the forest. His hands were steady, his eyes alive with purpose. From an old saddle repair kit, he cut a sheet of thick black leather and shaped it into a mask, a face without identity. 2 narrow slits for his eyes. Nothing else, no mouth, no expression. It would fit tight across his skin, sealing away the man he had been. This was not a disguise. It was a rebirth. Then he turned to his saddle. Every piece of metal, every buckle, stirrup, and clasp, he wrapped carefully in cloth until no sound would betray him. The silence became his armor. His horse, a tall jet-black stallion named Midnight, watched from the trees as if sensing what was coming. The animal had once belonged to a Union officer who'd fallen in battle. Isaac had taken the horse, cared for him, trained him. Now Midnight would be more than a companion. He would be a shadow given form. Isaac spent days in the clearing behind the cabin, training the animal in complete silence. No reins, no whip, only the subtle shift of his weight, the whisper of his hand. Midnight learned quickly. He would stand unmoving when Isaac did, and he would charge like thunder when commanded. The man and horse moved together as one, a ghost and his steed, born of necessity and vengeance. When Isaac finished the final touches of his outfit, the air around him seemed to hum with tension. He looked into the cracked mirror nailed to the cabin wall and saw no trace of the weary soldier who'd come home looking for peace. The man who stared back was a shadow wrapped in leather and darkness, the kind of fear the night riders thought they owned. The people of Redemption Crossing began whispering, before they even knew what they were whispering about. The woods at the edge of town seemed to move differently at night. Horses spooked at nothing. Some swore they heard hoofbeats echoing across the low hills long after midnight. But the real story began when the riders planned their next attack. The target was the Washington family. Good people, too prosperous for their color in the eyes of those who hated them for breathing. They had managed to buy 50 acres of their own, land they worked with pride. And for that they were marked for destruction. Isaac heard of it from Sarah 2 days before it was to happen. Her voice trembled when she told him. "They plan to ride from the swamp road," she whispered. "They light a cross first, say prayers over it like the devil's own mass." Isaac nodded, calm and cold. "Then I'll be waiting where they pray." That night, the riders gathered in a clearing near the cypress swamp, a dozen white-robed figures on restless horses, their laughter echoing through the trees like the shrill cry of carrion birds. The firelight from the burning cross painted their hoods a bloody orange. They believed themselves untouchable, creatures of the night. But in the deeper shadows, another creature waited. Isaac sat astride midnight, cloaked in black, motionless. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. The darkness around him swallowed him whole. He watched their ritual, the way they raised their torches, shouting oaths about purity and order. He felt the rage rise, then settle into a cold, controlled burn. He reached for a small stone and took careful aim. Above the riders' tethered horses hung a large hornet's nest, papery, gray, delicate as sin. The stone flew true. The night exploded with a shriek of chaos. 1,000 furious hornets poured down upon the riders' mounts, stinging flesh, biting eyes. Horses screamed and reared, snapping their reins, crashing into one another. The clearing erupted into panic, curses, shouts, confusion. And through that confusion, the phantom rider emerged. He didn't charge. He appeared. One moment there was only fire and smoke. The next, a shadow on a black horse materialized at the edge of the light. His mask gleamed wet with dew, his whip coiled like a serpent in his hand. The whip cracked once, a sound so sharp it split the night in half. A torch flew from a man's grip, extinguished in the mud. Another crack. A shotgun was ripped clean out of another man's hands. Horses bucked, men fell. And through it all, the rider never spoke. His silence was worse than a scream. The white robes scattered, the mighty cross toppled, trampled under midnight's hooves. Fire sputtered in the mud, sparks flying as men clawed for their weapons and their courage. They had come to deliver terror. They found it instead. By the time they regained their senses, the phantom rider was gone, melted back into the woods as if the night itself had swallowed him whole. When morning came, the story spread faster than fire on dry grass. The Washington family was safe. The riders, what was left of them, limped home, bruised, stung, and humiliated. And from cabin to cabin, from field to field, the tale grew. They said he moved like smoke, that his whip cracked like thunder, that he could ride through trees and vanish into fog. For the first time in a long time, the people of Redemption Crossing smiled when they spoke of the night. In the white community, however, the story twisted into something else. The men who'd been beaten and unmasked could not admit the truth, that they'd been broken by a single man. So they made it worse. They called him a demon of the swamp, said his horse breathed fire, said the air turned cold when he came. And Isaac Granger, the man beneath the mask, smiled when he heard the whispers. Fear was a weapon, and now it belonged to him. He knew the riders would not take their humiliation quietly. They would come again, stronger, angrier. He had bloodied their pride, and that was something men like them could never forgive. So by day, Isaac became invisible. He went into town dressed as a laborer, quiet and unassuming. He kept his head down, listened, watched. He found his way to the general store, where conversations carried faster than bullets. The shopkeeper, a frail man named Mr. Abernathy, served as the town's nervous conscience, a man who hated the violence, but feared it even more. Isaac bought flour and salt, but his ears were sharp as blades. 2 rough-looking men leaned against the counter, their boots muddy, their tones smug. "Heard them boys got scared by a ghost over by the swamp," one said with a snort. "Wasn't no ghost," the other hissed. "Something else. They're meeting Friday night to settle it. Big gathering at the old quarry. They're gonna end this." Isaac kept his eyes low as he paid for his things. Abernathy's hand trembled as he handed over the change. Strange times, the man whispered. You be careful, son. Isaac gave a quiet nod. He didn't need to ask more. He had what he came for, a time and a place. He would be waiting. And this time, when they rode into the night, they would find the darkness already waiting for them. The night the riders planned their meeting, the air over Redemption Crossing turned heavy, thick with the weight of something inevitable. Isaac could feel it in the wind, the low whisper that comes before a storm. He spent the day sharpening his blade and cleaning his revolver, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man preparing not for battle but for judgment. Across town, in a grand estate on the edge of Shelby County, another man prepared in his own way. Colonel Beauregard Harlan, once a Confederate cavalry officer, now a land baron who ruled through terror and fear, sat alone in his study, staring into the amber swirl of whiskey in his glass. The walls around him were crowded with the ghosts of a lost cause. Swords crossed above his mantle, flags faded by time, and the mounted heads of deer and boar stared down from the walls like silent witnesses to his obsession. Harlan's face, pale and hard, was illuminated by the flicker of lamplight. He was the Grand Cyclops of the Tennessee Night Riders, master of Redemption Crossing, and at that moment, a man consumed by fury. You were routed by one man, he hissed, his voice low and sharp enough to cut glass. His fist slammed against the mahogany desk, rattling the decanter. The sound made his lieutenant, a nervous man named Carter Wills, flinch where he stood by the window. One man and a dozen of my riders scattered like boys scared of thunder. Do you hear how the town talks now, Carter? They whisper his name, a name they don't even know. They call him the Phantom Rider. He spat the last words like venom. Carter swallowed hard. Colonel, sir, it wasn't natural. The way he moved. He didn't make a sound. The horses... Harlan's eyes flashed. Enough! Don't dress your failure in superstition. He rose from his chair and began to pace, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. The Phantom Rider is no ghost. He is a man. And men can bleed. He stopped and stared at the fire, his reflection fractured in the flames. The time for mercy is over. The time for purification has come. His voice lowered to a hiss. We'll ride again, this time in force. We'll burn the Washington place to ash. And when he comes to play hero, I want him dragged through town behind his own horse. Carter shifted uneasily. Sir, if we ride again so soon, the soldiers in Memphis might... The soldiers won't lift a finger, Harlan snapped. The federal men are tired. They'll look away like they always do. This county belongs to me. That night, in the flicker of his candlelight, Harlan drafted a message. Not to his enemies, but to his men. It was written in a language of fear, promising cleansing, order, and revenge. By the following evening, the riders were gathering in secret barns and river clearings, sharpening blades, whispering vows. Isaac's whispers came too, carried to him through the one person inside Harlan's world who still had a conscience. A young black stable hand named Elias worked at Harlan's Oak Hollow plantation, a sprawling estate of white columns and cruelty. He was barely 20, quiet, thin, and quick-witted. When Isaac approached him weeks earlier, the boy had trembled like a leaf, but there had been courage in him, a spark that refused to die. They met that night in a thicket near the old river road. The air was thick with the smell of honeysuckle and the faint metallic tang of fear. Elias appeared from the shadows, clutching a worn copy of King Lear against his chest like a shield. They're riding tomorrow night, Elias whispered, his voice cracking. Colonel Harlan's leading them himself. He said they're going to burn the Washington farm. Said they'll make it an example, so the whole county remembers what happens to folks who forget their place. Isaac's face didn't change, but his eyes darkened. How many? More than 20, Elias said. All armed. He's bringing that man Carter with him. The one with the scar. Isaac nodded slowly, placing a steady hand on Elias's shoulder. You've done good, boy. Better than most soldiers I've known. You saved lives tonight. Elias blinked hard, his fear cracking into pride for a brief, flickering moment. Now listen, Isaac said quietly. Don't go back to that place till morning. Not to the stables. Not anywhere they'd look. Find cover and stay hidden. Elias nodded. Yes, sir. By the time the young man vanished into the trees, Isaac was already forming his plan. He couldn't meet 20 armed men head-on. That was the way of fools. He would fight them the only way a ghost could, through the land itself. For the next 2 days, he prepared the backwoods trail leading to the Washington farm. He weakened the trunk of a dead oak with his axe and rigged a rope high above so that with one pull he could bring it crashing down. He laid tripvines between trees at a horse's chest height. He dug shallow pits and covered them with leaves and thin branches. He hung torn scraps of white cloth that would flutter in the dark like drifting spirits. When his work was done, the forest looked as innocent as it ever had, and deadly as a battlefield. The following night, clouds rolled over the Tennessee hills, hiding the moon. The riders gathered at Oak Hollow under the colonel's command, their torches burning like vengeful stars. They rode in grim silence through the swamp road, their white robes whispering against the night wind. Harlan led them, tall in the saddle, his ornate hood marking him as master among monsters. When they reached the edge of the woods near the Washington farm, he raised a hand. "This is the spot," he hissed. "No fire till my signal." Then came the crash. A thunderous snap echoed through the forest as the dead oak fell across the trail, blocking their path. Horses reared, men cursed. "Go around," Harlan shouted, his anger cutting through the panic. They veered onto the narrower game path, just as Isaac had planned. The first vine struck within moments. The lead rider gave a strangled cry as the taut line caught him across the chest and ripped him from his horse. Another man's mount stumbled into a hidden pit, screaming as it broke its leg. The air filled with chaos, shouts, curses, thrashing hooves. Then came the sounds. Eerie, unnatural cries echoed through the trees, part owl, part panther, but twisted, unholy. Isaac mimicked them perfectly from the shadows, his voice echoing between trunks. The riders, already shaken, fired blindly into the darkness. Their torches threw mad shadows, flickering across the trees, making it seem as if the forest itself moved. And then he was there, a shape on a black horse rising from the mist, silent and sure. The whip cracked once, then again, snapping a rifle from a man's grasp. Another torch fell. The shadows swallowed him, spread out, Harlan bellowed. But his order dissolved into confusion as men broke ranks, terrified and disoriented. Isaac had seen what he needed. The colonel and his lieutenant had ridden ahead of the others, separated and exposed. He turned Midnight's reins and moved through the dark like smoke until the 2 men appeared ahead, 2 white ghosts on the road. Harlan spotted him first. "There you are, you black devil," he roared, raising his revolver. Isaac's whip flashed, a blur of black lightning. It snapped the tip of Harlan's hood and yanked it clean off his head. The colonel froze, bare-faced in the moonlight, his cold gray eyes meeting Isaac's for the first time. Carter stared beside him, horror etched into his features. Isaac said nothing. The silence was the final blow. He turned Midnight and vanished into the trees, leaving the Grand Cyclops of Shelby County unmasked and humiliated before his own lieutenant. When the riders regrouped hours later, they found their leader pale, trembling, his hood gone. No one spoke, and from that night forward, the whispers in Redemption Crossing changed again. The Phantom Rider had stripped the Night Riders of their power. He had taken their darkness and made it his own. But deep inside his grand estate, Colonel Harlan was far from defeated. The humiliation had cut deeper than any blade. And in that quiet, simmering rage, something colder was being born. Not the fury of a beaten man, but the obsession of one who would rather burn the world than lose to a ghost. Colonel Beauregard Harlan sat in his study long after the lamps had burned low, staring at the empty space on the wall where his hood used to hang. The silk emblem of his power, stolen, desecrated, paraded in whispers across Shelby County, haunted him. His humiliation clung to the room like smoke. Even the bourbon in his glass tasted bitter. For hours he did not move. The clock on the mantel ticked soft as a heartbeat. When he finally spoke, it was not with rage, but with something far more dangerous, calm. "He thinks he's won," Harlan murmured. "He believes himself judge and executioner. He looked toward his trembling Lieutenant Carter Wills, who lingered near the window as if afraid the air itself might bite. "That arrogance," Harlan continued, "is what will destroy him." He rose from his chair with slow, deliberate grace, a predator uncoiling. "We tried to crush him with numbers and he slipped through us like fog." "Very well. If the hammer fails, we shall use the hook." Carter blinked. "Sir? We will draw him out," Harlan said, turning the silver letter opener in his hand until its edge glimmered. "We will bait him with what he cannot resist. Righteousness." He smiled faintly, a thin, cruel line. "The man beneath that mask believes he is a savior. He will not allow an innocent to burn, not even a white one." He turned toward the county map pinned on the wall, his finger tracing a small patch of farmland along the Duck River. "There's a farmer out past Columbia, a Union man named Jedediah Burke. Pays his colored hands fair, treats them decent. He's despised for it. A traitor to his own blood, perfect," Carter frowned. "We'll attack him." "We'll say we will," Harlan corrected. "We'll leak the rumor where the Phantom can hear it. He will come to defend his precious Union friend, and when he does, we will be waiting." He faced Carter again, eyes pale and fever bright. "No torches, no hoods. My men will already be hidden in the fields and tree lines. They will not try to capture him. They will shoot to kill, and when he falls, we will drag his corpse through Redemption Crossing at dawn for all to see." Carter hesitated. "And if he doesn't come?" Harlan's smile widened, humorless. "He will. Men like him always come." By the next day, the rumor had begun its slow, poisonous crawl through the countryside. Word spread in saloons and stables, carried on the careless tongues of those who thought themselves brave when drunk. By sunset, it reached Sarah Carter's porch, and by nightfall, it found its way to Isaac Granger. He heard it from Elias. The boy arrived breathless, his clothes damp with sweat and fear. They met in the same thicket near the river, where honeysuckle choked the air. Elias's hands shook as he spoke. "They're saying the riders are after Jedediah Burke tonight," he whispered. "The colonel told everyone it's to punish him for hiring colored men." "But—" He hesitated, eyes darting nervously through the trees. "Sir, something feels wrong." "They've been too quiet, too organized. I seen Carter giving orders in the dark, not loud like usual." Isaac's eyes narrowed. The pieces slid together like stones, locking into place. "It's bait," he said softly. "He's not after Burke, he's after me." Elias looked stricken. "Then what'll you do?" "What I always do," Isaac said. "Turn the dark against them." He placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "You've done more than enough, boy. But tonight, don't go back there. Find a place to hide till morning." The young man's voice trembled. "You ain't going alone, are you?" Isaac gave him a faint smile. "A ghost rides alone." After Elias disappeared into the woods, Isaac returned to his cabin. He left the mask and the black garments folded neatly on the table. Tonight, stealth would serve him better than legend. He dressed in plain dark clothes and checked his revolver. Only 6 rounds. He would have to make them count. By the time he reached Burke's farm, the moon was a thin bone in the sky. The land was silent, too silent. The fields glistened faintly with dew, and from somewhere distant came the croak of frogs by the river. Isaac moved like a shadow along the creek bed, crouched low, eyes scanning the darkness. Then he heard it, the soft squeak of leather, the faint metallic click of a rifle being cocked. He froze. Ahead of him, half hidden by brush, was the outline of a man lying prone. Another crouched behind a fence post, then another in the loft of the barn, the moonlight glinting off his barrel. There were dozens of them, perfectly placed in a ring around the farmhouse. It wasn't a raid. It was a kill box. A shiver ran through him, but his mind stayed cold. He started to back away, and that's when he heard footsteps in the mud above the creek. 2 men close, no time to run. He slid silently into the water. It was icy and foul, thick with muck that clutched at his boots. He went under completely, leaving only a hollow reed above the surface to breathe through. His lungs screamed as he held still. The men stopped almost directly overhead. "You see anything?" one whispered. "Nothing. Quiet as a grave," said the other. "Good. I want that bastard dead." Harlan promised double pay for whoever drops him first. Their voices drifted off. Isaac stayed under for what felt like eternity, the cold eating into his bones. Something slick brushed against his leg, a snake maybe, but he didn't flinch. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. At last, he rose, gasping softly. The patrol was gone. He crawled from the water, soaked and shivering, his breath fogging in the chill. He'd seen enough to know Harlan's plan was flawless. If he rode in now, he'd die before he saw the first muzzle flash. But if he turned away, Burke and his family might die by morning anyway. He crouched under the trees, mind racing. He needed to pull them away, force them to abandon the ambush. Something big enough to shake their discipline, something they couldn't ignore. The idea struck him like lightning. He slipped through the woods, moving swiftly and silent, circling far around the ambush, until the trees thinned and the land opened into fields. Ahead lay Oak Hollow, Colonel Harlan's own estate. Beyond it stretched acres of dry hay, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Isaac knelt, gathered brittle grass and brush, and built a small mound. With flint and steel he struck a spark. The fire caught instantly, hungry and bright. He fed it until the wind took over. Within minutes, the flames were leaping high, roaring through the field with terrifying speed. A great orange glow rose into the sky, a false dawn over Shelby County. Miles away, the men waiting in ambush saw it. Fire! Someone shouted. "It's at Oak Hollow!" Confusion erupted. Half wanted to hold position. The rest were already running for their horses. Loyalty warred with fear. Then came Harlan's furious command, "Save the estate!" And the ambush collapsed in chaos. Isaac watched from the edge of the forest as their torches vanished into the distance. He turned midnight toward Redemption Crossing. The trap had been broken. By the time he reached the empty town square, the fire was visible even from there, a pillar of smoke clawing at the sky. Isaac dismounted before the public notice board. From inside his shirt, he pulled the colonel's ornate hood, the symbol he had stolen weeks before. He pinned it to the board with his Bowie knife, the steel gleaming under the moon. It quivered there. A message burned into silence. "You set a trap for me. I was in your house." Then he vanished back into the dark, leaving the hood fluttering in the night wind like the shroud of a dying empire. By morning, the fire at Oak Hollow was the talk of every saloon and street corner. The phantom rider, it was said, had struck at the colonel's very heart. And somewhere in that burned estate, Colonel Harlan stood amid the ashes, staring at the ruin of his land, and swore he would not rest until he saw the rider's body hanging from a tree. By the third morning after the fire, Redemption Crossing trembled under a silence so thick it seemed to choke the air. The world had gone gray with ash. The great house at Oak Hollow was nothing but a blackened skeleton. Its once proud pillars collapsed, its windows hollow and weeping soot. Colonel Beauregard Harlan stood before the ruins, coat unbuttoned, boots caked with soot, his face a mask of quiet madness. The firelight had singed the edges of his hair and burned the cuff of his sleeve. But he didn't feel it. He felt only the emptiness, the cold, bottomless rage that had swallowed the man he once was. His lieutenant, Carter Wills, stood a few paces back, holding his hat in trembling hands. "Sir," he began carefully, "we can rebuild—" "Rebuild?" Harlan's voice was low, almost a whisper. "You think I care about timber and nails?" He turned slowly, his eyes pale as glass. "He took everything, my home, my men's loyalty, my name. He's turned me into a story," Carter swallowed. "Then let's end his story." Harlan stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, we end it. No more half measures. No more cleverness. I want the rider dead before the week is out." He walked to the charred porch and drew his revolver. "Call the men. Every one of them. From Columbia, from Pulaski, from Franklin if you must. Spread the word. A bounty. $500 in gold for the one who brings me the Phantom Rider's mask." Carter hesitated. "That'll draw killers, sir. Not just your men." "Good," Harlan said softly. "Let the devils fight each other. But before the blood dries, I'll have my vengeance." Word of the bounty spread like disease. By nightfall, the woods around Redemption Crossing crawled with men, bounty hunters, deserters, drifters. Some came on horseback, others on foot, all armed and hungry. They prowled the roads, questioning farmers, searching barns, terrorizing anyone who looked like they might know something. and inevitably, they found Elias. He'd been hiding at the old mill outside town, surviving on bread and river water. When the hunters cornered him at dawn, his heart sank, but he stood his ground. He had seen death before, seen it ride in white robes. This was just another mask. "Where's your rider, friend?" One of the men snarled, pressing a rifle to his chest. Elias said nothing. His silence earned him a backhand that split his lip. Another man stepped forward, older, meaner. "You think you're a hero, boy? That phantom can't save you. Tell us where he is." Elias raised his chin, eyes bloodshot but defiant. "He don't hide." "He hunts!" The butt of a rifle slammed into his ribs, dropping him to his knees. Pain tore through him, but he clung to the thought that kept him alive. If they were wasting time on him, they weren't close to Isaac. By the time they dragged him into town, his face was swollen, his shirt torn. They tied him to the post outside the old courthouse, laughing as they questioned him again. Carter Wills rode up and dismounted slowly, brushing the dust from his coat. "The colonel wants answers," he said. Elias looked up through the blood in his eyes. "You'll get 'em," he rasped. "Just not from me." Carter's jaw tightened. "I admire your spirit, boy, but you picked the wrong ghost to follow." He turned to his men. "Hang him." The noose went over Elias's head before the words had cooled. The crowd of bounty hunters watched, some grinning, others silent. The rope creaked, then came the sound, distant at first, like thunder rolling over the hills. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, echoing down the main road. Every head turned. The sound grew louder, a single horse, steady as a drumbeat of judgment. From the far end of the street, through the haze of dust and morning sun, he appeared, a tall rider in black, masked, mounted on a coal, dark stallion that seemed born of smoke and fury. The phantom rider. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some reached for their guns. Others simply froze. The horse stopped at the center of the square, the sun glinting off the steel buckle of the saddle. Isaac sat still, every inch of him carved from silence. His gaze found Elias. Their eyes met for the briefest second, the kind of look that holds more words than a lifetime of speech. Elias managed a faint smile. "Told you," he whispered through split lips. Then Isaac moved. The whip cracked like lightning. The rope above Elias's head snapped clean, the boy dropping to the dirt. Panic exploded. Guns roared, horses screamed. Isaac's revolver barked 3 times, each shot precise, unhurried, final. The first man fell from the steps. The second dropped beside the trough. The third barely drew his weapon. Smoke curled through the air. The phantom's silhouette blurred and vanished into it. Carter Wills fired wildly, shouting for his men. But by the time the smoke cleared, the rider was gone. Elias too. They found only a single bullet casing and a message carved into the courthouse door. "Your law is written in ash." That night, deep in the woods beyond the river, Isaac tended to Elias's wounds beside a campfire. The boy's breathing was shallow, his body bruised and broken, but he lived. "You shouldn't have come," Isaac said quietly, pressing a wet cloth to his friend's ribs. Elias managed a weak laugh. "You shouldn't have either." They sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the whisper of cicadas. Elias broke it first. "You could end this, you know. You could run. Ain't no shame in that." Isaac shook his head slowly. "Running doesn't change what men like Harlan are. It only gives them more room to grow." Elias looked at him through the flickering firelight. "Then what's the plan?" Isaac stared into the flames. "He wants me." "Not the people, me. So that's what he'll get. You mean to ride into his hands?" "No," Isaac said, his voice steady. "I mean to end this where it started, on his land, at dawn." He stood and walked to where midnight waited under the trees, the black stallion's eyes gleaming like embers. From his saddlebag, Isaac drew out his mask. He turned it over once in his hand, the surface dull, scarred from smoke, the symbol of every ghost this land had ever buried. He put it on. Elias tried to sit up, his voice barely a whisper. "You think one man can change all this?" Isaac looked toward the horizon, where the faintest streak of light was breaking. I don't need to change it, he said. Just make them remember. He mounted Midnight and turned toward the east, the morning mist curling around them. Behind him, Elias called weakly, "Ride fast, Phantom." Isaac didn't answer. He rode on, a dark figure dissolving into dawn, toward a reckoning that had waited too long. By the time the sun rose over the charred hills of Shelby County, every rider in Harlan's army was awake and armed. The colonel himself stood on the remains of his porch, rifle in hand, eyes bloodshot but steady. "Spread out," he ordered. "He's coming." And from somewhere beyond the smoke and ruin, faint but certain, came the low thunder of a single horse. The dawn came red over Shelby County, not the gentle red of sunrise, but the bloodshot glare of something wrathful. Mist clung to the charred remains of Oak Hollow, twisting through the skeletal trees like smoke searching for a home. The air smelled of burnt pine and gunpowder. Every leaf, every shadow seemed to hold its breath. Colonel Beauregard Harlan stood on what used to be his front porch, flanked by a dozen armed men. His once elegant coat was streaked with soot. His face, unshaven, looked carved from granite. The revolver at his side gleamed like polished sin. "Eyes sharp, boys," he murmured. "He'll come from the tree line." They waited in silence. Somewhere a crow cawed, then fled as if it too wanted no part in what was coming. The minutes stretched like years. And then a sound, soft at first, a distant rhythm, hoofbeats, slow, even, certain. The men shifted uneasily, scanning the fog. One cursed under his breath. Another muttered a prayer. Out of the mist came the shape they had all whispered about, a black horse and its rider, cloaked and masked, moving through the haze like something that didn't belong to this world. The stallion's hooves barely made a sound on the scorched earth. The rider sat tall and silent, eyes hidden, his very stillness more terrifying than any scream. The phantom rider had come home. "Fire!" Harlan shouted. Gunfire shattered the morning. The first volley tore through the fog, but the figure did not fall. He weaved through it like a shadow dodging light. The crack of his whip cut through the chaos, striking a rifle from one man's hands, then another. Horses screamed. Men stumbled, "Hold the line." Harlan bellowed, but the line was already breaking. Isaac and Midnight moved as one, a blur of motion, precise and unrelenting. He fired twice, both shots clean. 2 riders fell before they even knew what had hit them. He used the fog as his ally, vanishing and reappearing in bursts of thunder and shadow. And then, through the smoke, his gaze found Harlan. Their eyes met. One pair gray and cold as winter, the other burning behind a mask black as judgment. Harlan raised his rifle, took aim and fired. The bullet struck Isaac's shoulder, spinning him in the saddle. Pain tore through him, but he gritted his teeth and stayed upright. Midnight reared, neighing loud enough to shake the earth. The phantom's whip cracked again, this time wrapping around Harlan's rifle, yanking it from his grasp. The weapon clattered to the ground. Harlan cursed and drew his revolver, firing wildly as Isaac charged through the smoke. The 2 men collided in a blur of fury, gunmetal, leather, and hate. They crashed to the ground, the world exploding into dust and noise. Isaac's revolver flew from his grip. The colonel rolled to his knees, raising his pistol, but Isaac was faster. He lunged, grabbing Harlan's wrist, twisting hard until the bone cracked. The gun dropped. For a moment, they struggled in the dirt. 2 men locked in a battle that felt older than either of them. Soldier against slaver, justice against power. Harlan's hand found a rock. He swung it hard, catching Isaac across the jaw. The mask cracked, splitting near the cheek. Blood filled Isaac's mouth, but he didn't let go. He slammed his shoulder into Harlan's chest, knocking the colonel backward onto the blackened earth. "You think you can erase me?" Harlan hissed through bloodied lips. "You think the world will remember you? You're nothing but a ghost in a country that doesn't care if you lived or died." Isaac's hand closed around the fallen pistol. He leveled it at Harlan's chest. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But ghosts have a long memory." The gun roared once. Harlan's body jerked, his eyes wide with disbelief. He slumped back against the scorched ground, the breath leaving him in a long, broken sigh. The fog swallowed the sound. For a long moment, There was nothing but silence, the kind that follows storms. When the air is heavy and the world feels new again, Isaac staggered to his feet, breathing hard. The wound in his shoulder burned like fire, but he stayed upright. Around him, the surviving riders fled, their courage gone with their master. The legend they feared had become flesh, and flesh had triumphed. Midnight trotted forward through the mist, nudging Isaac's arm gently as if asking, "Is it done?" Isaac holstered his weapon and looked out over the land. Smoke rose from the ruins, curling toward the brightening sky. The light was soft, golden, almost merciful. He removed his mask. For the first time in months, he let his face breathe the morning air. His expression was not victory. It was sorrow, deep and quiet, for every life taken and every freedom still not found. From the road beyond the trees came the faint sound of hoofbeats, cautious, hesitant. Then a voice, young and uncertain, "Isaac?" It was Elias, bandaged and pale but alive. He had followed, just as Isaac feared he would. Isaac turned, managing a tired smile. "You shouldn't be here." The boy looked at the dead man on the ground, then at Isaac. "You did it." "No," Isaac said softly. "He did it to himself." They stood in silence as the sun crept higher. "Come on," Isaac said finally. "There's work to do. Still too many ghosts in these woods." Together they rode back toward Redemption Crossing, two silhouettes against the rising sun, the legend and the witness. By the time they reached town, word had already spread. The colonel was dead. The riders had scattered. People stepped from their homes, blinking in disbelief as the morning light touched faces that hadn't smiled in months. No one saw Isaac remove his mask for good, bury it deep in the ashes of Sarah Carter's old barn. No one saw him mount up one last time, or the direction he rode when he finally left. But the stories began that same night. Some said the phantom rider vanished into the hills. Others swore they saw him years later far to the west, helping freedmen find safety on the road to Texas. And every so often, when the wind blew just right through the hollowed woods of Shelby County, someone claimed they heard hoofbeats, slow, steady, echoing through the trees. Not the gallop of a rider chasing vengeance, but the measured pace of one who had found peace. The children of Redemption Crossing grew up hearing his name whispered around campfires. The elders swore the story was true, and in time, even those who had once feared the dark began to walk a little taller when the night fell, because they believed, just maybe, that the phantom rider still watched over them. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the mist crawled low and the world felt thin between the living and the lost, that belief felt like justice. He came from the ashes of war, rode through fire and shadow, and vanished like a breath. But his legend remained, a warning to tyrants, a comfort to the hunted. They called him the Phantom Rider of 1871, and though no man ever found his grave, his story lived on, not in history books, but in the hearts of those who knew what it meant to fight for light in a land still haunted by its own darkness.